In this exercise, we're going to look at unit testing of Angular applications. We'll make use of Jasmine and Karma for conducting our tests. So we will write a test for the menu controller in our application. You can use a similar approach for writing tests for all the other controllers, services that are part of your Angular application. We'll also make use of the Angular mocks in order to provide mock data for testing within our application. To get you started, first install the Jasmine core. To do that, on your terminal, move to the Confusion folder. Once you are in the folder, type sudo npm install Jasmine core -- save-def and install the Jasmine core. You would need sudo if you are working on a OS X or a Linux machine. Otherwise, you can just type npm install Jasmine core -- save-def. Next, install the Karma command line interface by typing npm install karma-cli-g. So this is again a global package. So if you are on OS X or Linux, use sudo. After this, you will install the Karma Jasmine plugin. So to do that, type npm install Karma Jasmine save-def. Let's now install some browser plugins for Karma so that it can make use of those browsers for executing the tests. So to do that, at the command prompt, type npm install PhantomJS, Karma PhantomJS launcher, Karma Chrome launcher. If you are using Firefox or Safari or Internet Explorer, you would want to install the corresponding plugins for those browsers. I am using Chrome, so I am only installing the Chrome launcher here. Once that is complete, you want to install the Angular mocks module. So to do that, at the command prompt, type bower install Angular mocks -s. So this installs the ngmock module to be used within your application for doing testing. Next, we're going to set up for Karma to run our unit tests. So to do that, let's go to the Confusion folder, and in there, we will create a new folder named as test. Then in the test folder, you will create a new file and name it as karma-conf.js. This is a name that we choose for convenience. In general, by convention, this is the name being used for Karma configuration files. You can use any name that you like, but to be consistent with the way the tests are written, I'm using the name that is often suggested for the configuration file. So let's name that karma.conf.js. Now, once this file is created, now we need to configure Karma in this file. In the Karma conf file, add in the configuration for Karma. Let's start out by adding module exports. This is the node's way of specifying a node module. And inside there, we implement a function called config. And for config, we use the set. So this is Karma's way of specifying the configuration. Inside that, I have already set up a couple of configuration values. The first one, I set the base path as ... meaning the base path is the top directory, which is the confusion directory. So anything that is referred to here will be with respect to that directory. Then the second one I set up is that I specify that the frameworks that I'm using for carrying out the test is Jasmine. If you are using Mocha and Chai and other test frameworks, you would specify them here. Now in this exercise, I am only using Jasmine, so I have specified the frameworks as Jasmine here. Next, I configure Karma to use all the files that are required for carrying out the tests. So here I specify the files and patterns that need to be loaded into the browser. So I specify AngularJS, Angular resource, Angular UI router, all these I need for my application to run. And also I specify Angular mux. We just installed the ngmux module earlier. And also I specify app scripts star.js because those are the files that I am going to carry out my tests on. And then also test /:js. So this is where all my files are stored. Actually, I should be using test unit /star.js because all my unit tests I'm going to be storing inside the unit subfolder. Also, I specify in particular those files that I don't want Karma to use in the test folder. So I specify that the protractor conf.js, which I'm going to create in the next exercise, and also the end-to-end tests that I create, I don't want to use them in running the unit tests. So I specify explicitly that those files are excluded. Then I add in some more configuration information here. I specify that the preprocessors, I don't have any at the moment. You might need them in the future for some other tests, but we just declare that we are not using any of them. And the test results, the reporter that I'm using is called the progress reporter. So I specify that explicitly. You can use other kinds of reporters that you want. These are available at this link specified here. Also, the web server port number that I'm using is 9876 in order to carry out the tests. And colors I specify as true, meaning that when the Karma test is run on a terminal, I want certain parts, like for example, if there are errors that are caused, I want that to be reflected in red, successes to be reflected in green in my terminal. So I specify colors as true there. And the log level, and also auto watch meaning that whenever it keeps a watch on all the files, whenever any of those files are changed, Karma will automatically rerun the tests on my behalf. Then finally, I add in the code for configuring the browsers that I want to use for carrying out the tests. So here I am specifying the browsers as Chrome, PhantomJS, and PhantomJS Custom. So these three browsers I am using in this case. So if you are using Safari or Firefox, you would specify them here. And also I specify some custom launcher. Because I am using PhantomJS Custom, I specify some custom launcher information here for the PhantomJS browser to be used. So certain information here, Wix security is false, window name, the base, and some flags for that. Also at the bottom, I say for PhantomJS launcher, I specify exit on resources true, which means that if my Karma exits, then it'll automatically kill the Phantom browser that is running in the background. And also single run as false, meaning that my Karma test runner will be continuously running and watching the files, and whenever I make any changes, it'll automatically rerun these tests. This is a good way for you to keep your unit tests up and running while you're modifying the code, so that anytime you modify and save a file, the tests are automatically rerun for you. With these changes, we have completed the configuration of Karma. So we will save that and then move on to create our unit test. Next, under the test folder, I will create a new folder named unit. And then under the unit folder, I will create another folder named controllers. And this is where I am going to store all my tests for the controllers. So a good organization of your folder structure makes it very easy for you to maintain your test code. So inside the controllers folder, I'm going to create a new file and name it as menu controllers.js. So menu controller.js. Now you immediately understand that the menu controller.js file should contain the tests for the menu controller. Obviously, once you create the menu controller.js file, let's start configuring the test. So to do that, first, I will put in the basic configuration for the test here. I am specifying the test as described. So this is where I am using the Jasmine's syntax for specifying the test. So I'm saying describe controller menu controller. Obviously, this is a test for the menu controller, and then inside there I specify the function. In this function, I will configure all the tests that I want to carry out on the menu controller. And also, I specify before each test. Remember, the before each is a way of specifying in Jasmine what needs to be set up before the test is run, and specify that module as Confusion app. So this way of specifying says that this is angular.mocks.module. So this is a mock module of Confusion app that is set up so that the controller can be tested. Also, I specify a few variable names here, which I'm going to make use of in configuring the test. So I specify menu controller, scope, and $HTTP backend. This last one is for doing the mock. After the menu controller, now I am doing the injection of the mock information here. So I specify before each inject. So this is the dependency, mock dependencies that I'm injecting for carrying out the tests. So I specify inject function $controller underscore HTTP backend underscore. The underscores will be automatically removed by Angular when the test is being run, and then root scope and menu factory. So I am injecting all these four here so that they can be used while running the test on the menu controller. And then after this, the mock dependencies, the $HTTP backend is specified as equal to underscore $HTTP backend. This is to make sure that even though I am using the $HTTP backend as my variable name, I don't want it to conflict with the incoming parameters. So that's why I specify underscores. Angular has a way of ignoring those underscores when it is running the code. Now, the HTTP backend mock itself, I am configuring it such that it says expect get. So when it gets a GET request at this particular URL here, localhost 3000/dishes, it will respond with this JavaScript, or rather JSON object here. So in here, inside this JSON object, I have specified mock information for 2 dishes. I just need that to carry out the test. You can include more if you want. In my case, I just included 2 dishes information here just to carry out the test. So I have specified that as part of the response. So when the HTTP backend receives a GET request at this URL, it's going to respond with this JSON data. Also, I am initializing the scope variable to root scope new. So this is how you can create a new scope under the root scope and then use that when you're carrying out the tests. Then you specify the menu controller by using the dot controller and specify the menu controller name, and then you are injecting the parameters scope as scope, the scope variable that you just created, and menu factory is the same as the menu factory that you got in as the parameter for the injection. Once you have configured this, then at the end we specify HTTP backend flush, meaning that when the request is received, the flush will cause the reply to be flushed back to the module so that the test can be carried out immediately. After that, I have now configured a few tests to be carried out on my menu controller. Let's look at one test at a time. The first test, remember, this is how we specify tests in Jasmine. So it is the starting point, and then in here I have a string that helps me to describe what this test is going to do. You can specify whatever you want in the string, but if you give it a meaningful name, then you know that that is what this test is going to be performing. And also you can easily read it as if it's a description. So you can say it should have show details as false. So you immediately understand that I am testing the show details variable on the scope and making sure that it is actually set to false. And inside that function, I specify expect scope.showDetails. So I am checking scope.showDetails by using this expect function and specify that to be falsy. So this is Jasmine's way of saying this should be false. So that's the first test I'm carrying out, because when we start out, we are setting the show details to false. That is what we are expected to do in the controller. So here I am checking to make sure that that has been done correctly. The second test that I am carrying out is it should create dishes with 2 dishes fetched from XHR, meaning from the mocked backend. So remember, in the HTTP backend, we have specified it to send back a JSON object with 2 dishes in there. So obviously, when that comes back, the dishes variable should be initialized with 2 JavaScript objects. So that's why I'm testing out a few things here. I say expect scope show menu to be true. The show menu has been set to true when the reply has come back from the server correctly, from the mock server, obviously, correctly. So in the function, remember that when I call the resource, I am making sure that in the success function that I supply to the query, I am setting the show menu to be true. So that's what I am testing to make sure that that is properly done. Also, I'm making sure that show scope dishes is defined correctly. So I say expect scope dishes to be defined. And then I specify expect scope dishes length to be 2, because I remember that I have configured the HTTP backend to send back JSON object with 2 dishes. So here, if it came in correctly, then the scope dishes length should be equal to 2. So that's what I am testing here. So that's the second test I'm carrying out to make sure that my code is written correctly. The third test I am carrying out here is it should have the correct data order in the dishes. So that's where I test to make sure that all the data that exists in the scope dishes variable is properly configured. The first dish has a name. I'm randomly picking a couple of things to test on these two. You can configure other tests similarly to test for other elements inside those dishes. So here I randomly picked dishes zero's name to be tested. So I say expect scope dishes 0 name to be this. And similarly expect scope dishes 1's label to be new. Now this is a reflection of what I actually sent back using the HTTP backend. So I remember what I sent in. So I am testing to make sure that my controller properly initialized the dishes object with the right kind of thing. So I randomly pick a couple of things to test to reassure myself that the code has done the things correctly. You can be more elaborate here and test out every little property of the JavaScript objects in dishes. This is just an illustration of how you would carry out the test. The last test I'm carrying out is that if my select function is called with a particular value, I am making sure that certain parameters are correctly being set by the select function. So that's the last test. It should change the tab selected based on the tab clicked. Remember, I set up the template so that when the tab is clicked, the select function is called with the appropriate parameter. So in this case, at the start, the scope tab value should be equal to 1. So that's the first test I'm carrying out. Then I call scope select with the value 3 here. So when the select function is called, then it should change the scope tab value to 3, and also it should set the filled text value to mains. This is how the code should have been written. So that's the test that I'm carrying out. Expect scope tab to equal 3, expect scope filled text to equal mains. I'm just randomly picked one scenario and then carrying out the test here. You can write out the tests for all the different scenarios correspondingly. I'm just illustrating to you how you would configure a test. Now, when you are writing your code, you would first configure all the tests. Then you will go and start writing the code in order to pass these tests. So that's what we call as test-driven development. Now that we have configured all the tests, let's save the changes and then we'll carry out the test to make sure that our code has been properly configured in the menu controller. Now you can follow a similar approach for writing tests for the other controllers and also the services that you use within your application. The approach is pretty much the same for all of these different cases. Now to carry out the test, at the command prompt, type karma. Now remember, you should be in the, I just realized that I should go to the test folder. So move to the test folder in your terminal and then type out karma start karma.conf.js, and then when you invoke that, then the tests will automatically be carried out by Karma. You might see a Chrome browser start up briefly and then remain started for a period of time. That is normal because you are carrying out a test in a real browser. Also, the Phantom.js, as we realize, is a phantom browser that can be used for carrying out testing. So that will not cause browsers to be started up. If you prefer to see the test running in real browsers, you can configure the real browsers to be run. I use Phantom.js also just to illustrate to you one more way of carrying out the test. So let's run the tests now. It will take a little bit of time for the tests to run. They have all been run properly, and then you would also notice that the Karma would have opened a Chrome browser for you. You might have something like this opened in your computer. And this is, don't shut down this browser. This is being used by Karma to carry out the tests. Also, when you go back to your terminal, you will notice that Karma has run the tests and then just sitting there. Now, if you make any changes to any of your files, Karma will automatically rerun all the tests. Let's go ahead and make a change to our test file to make Karma fail some of the tests. Going back to the test file menu controller.js, I'm going to change this scope tab to equal. I will change the scope select. I will call that with 2. Then obviously these two tests that follow will have to fail because they are not correct. So let me change that value to 2 and then save the change. Now, when you go back to your terminal, you will immediately notice that some of the tests have failed. Some tests were fine, but some other tests failed. So that is what is being indicated here. So Karma uses colors. Remember that we had set up Karma to use colors. So that's why any failed test will be indicated in red color, and then success test will be indicated in green color. Let's go back and correct our test, and then you will see that Karma will again rerun the tests, and all the tests will be successful. When you go back to your terminal, you will see that Karma has rerun all the tests, and all of them have been successful. You can similarly now go and edit your controllers.js file in your app scripts folder, and Karma will automatically carry out the tests for you. So any changes you make to any of those files will cause Karma to rerun the tests. So this is continuously carrying out the tests. So if you are writing code, now you see the advantage of configuring your tests. You would want to first write your tests and have Karma running there, and then after that you will start writing your actual code in order to pass the tests. So if you had designed your tests properly, then you can ensure that when you write your code is properly written. If it passes all the tests, that means that you must have completed everything correctly. If you have completed partially the code, then your tests will keep failing, and you keep modifying your implementation until the tests pass. So this is what we call as test-driven development. Now, this is useful once you get a good handle on AngularJS and you know how to write AngularJS applications. At that point, instead of simply writing an Angular application, you can set up test-driven development so that you first write your tests, configure Karma, keep it running, and then go back and start developing your Angular application. That is the suggested way in test-driven development. With this, we complete an examination of unit testing in this exercise. So in this exercise, we used Karma and Jasmine together to carry out unit tests on our menu controller. You can similarly configure tests for the remaining parts of your Angular application.